of judiciary, so, but that's all right.
Hey, look who's here. Beat the
We-
bird.
We've given those stragglers 5 minutes, so we are going to start. I'll call the committee to order, and the first thing on the agenda is a briefing. If you- Our witness would introduce himself and explain why we have 192 pages or whatever you said.
No, only 92.
Only
92, yes. So good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Michael Kane. I'm the Legislative Budget Assistant for the Office of Legislative Budget Assistant. Just for those who are new to the committee, a little more about our office is we have two divisions. We have a 7-person budget division, which we have people here. We have Mick Landergan, who is going to be working on education, transportation, fishing, game, and safety. We have Jack Mullen, who you may notice, the former Senate staffer who took over from Mike Hoffman, who retired. Jack's going to be dealing with Category 1 of the budget, retirement, administrative services, and various. Melissa Rollins behind me, former DRA employer. She'll be taking over for Mike Hoffman's category, which is environmental services, a judicial branch, category 2 and 3. And then we have Kevin Ripple, who does health and human services. And then Chris Shea, who just actually grabbed a couple extra copies. If members of the audience want a copy of the big briefing document, they can have it. Chris is the Deputy LBA responsible for revenues and capital budget, the preparation of the capital budget. And then we also have an audit division, currently 22 employees. It floats between 22 and 24 who perform financial audits and performance audits. And just for those who are watching, if you go to the LBA website on the gencourt.state.nh.us/LBA/budget, and you go to the 26-27 operating budget, you can see the posting. This briefing is actually posted there right now. So that's what I have basically for now, just an overview of what our office does. We do the budget, obviously. We'll work with the House Finance Committee and the Senate Finance Committee over the next couple of months. And then we also are responsible for preparing fiscal notes on all bills with a fiscal impact to state, county, and local exceeding $10,000. And then also we do fiscal impact statements, so a cost estimate on citizens, businesses, political subdivisions, and the state relative to rules. So any rules that go through the GELCAR committee. So just for volume, we have a 7-member staff, including Pam Ellis, who's back at her desk right now, who processes all the fiscal notes, fiscal committee items, and fiscal impact statements. But as far as volume, probably about 1,100 fiscal notes this year. We're going to have to prepare upon introduction, or at least review them and prepare either an under 10K if the impact is under 10,000, a full fiscal note, or sometimes what you'll see is a generic due to time constraints. And that really has to do with deadlines of when the bill is signed off and when it's introduced and when the committee starts. But so we'll probably do over 1,000 fiscal notes a year, just between amendments and versions that come through. We do about 300 to 400, about 300 rules, fiscal impact statements on rules, and that's because I have a great staff of 6 people really pushing to do all that. And then as far as the budget, in front of you, you'll see a 92-page document, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing. This is more a reference document that we provide to the House and Senate Finance Committees at the beginning of each session. And then we walk them through kind of the process. You can see on the first page after the cover page, just kind of wanted to note, I did introduce our staff. You may or may not be aware that the General Court's going to change their email from an leg.state.nh.us to a shorter gc.nh.gov. So you can see we've updated our emails there. It's my understanding both work. Chris and I are kind of the test pilots for the LBA office. We haven't had too many issues so far, so seamless transition, we're hoping. But we're also located, for those who haven't come into our office, in room 102 of the State House right behind us. So feel free to stop by and ask us any questions you may have. As far as, if I go to page 4, of the document begins on page 3, but page 4 are RSA 9, so the statute relative to appropriations and the budget. So on page 4, near the bottom, RSA 9.2 is transmission to the legislature. This is the statutory requirement to have the budget, the governor submit their budget by February 15th, which happens to be a Saturday this year. Currently, Governor Ayotte is working with the agencies right now, developing her proposed budget, and then we'll present that to the full House and Senate sometime in February prior to the 15th. We're not involved in that process. We'll hear some rumblings here and there, but right now I would assume the governor is probably presenting most likely around the 12th or 13th of February to comply with that statute. But if we hear anything else, I can let you know. The next thing with the budget, as you may not know, House Bill 1 is the appropriation. It's about an 800-page document of detailed appropriations for each agency, for staff, for current expense, for all the various components of an agency. And then you have a so-called trailer bill, which is the accompanying bill along with the budget that has all the statutory changes required to implement the budget, as well as any other policy either the House or Senate want to include. I just wanted to, on the bottom of page 4, going into page 5, there has been, House Finance will get the budget first. And usually it takes OLS a couple weeks, at least a couple weeks, to draft House Bill 2. It could be a 200 to 300 section bill that OLS, Legislative Services, has to draft. So there's usually a time, kind of a void on House Finance on what they can see of House Bill 2 prior to being introduced. And so there was frustration that resulted in an amendment. And so beginning on page 5, you can see the last sentence that was added at the top of the page, that the document shall be available in printed format. So it requires the trailer bill, the governor, to submit that on February 15th. Printed format, at least one electronic computer file, and shall be publicly posted on the Department of Administrative Services website on the data transmittal. This will be the first budget will that be required. So hopefully there won't be that. There'll be at least a rough draft of the proposal by the governor on what she sees the trailer bill, including that House Finance will begin their work. I'm going to skip forward several pages. Kind of timeline. If we go to page 20, is the select House deadlines. So the deadline I'm going to point out is the crossover. So the House has a crossover of April 10th, which is a week or so later than it typically has. It still requires the Finance Committee to report the budget out by April 3rd, meaning that all the divisions, the 3 divisions in House Finance, will have to have all their work approved by the committee the week prior. So right around usually the week before, April 1st or 2nd, they'll present to the full committee, who will vote on April 3rd. Meaning, really, House Finance will only have until the end of March, right around the 26th, for all the divisions to complete their work. And then we compile all the documents that the full committee votes on. So it's between 5 and 6 weeks for them to go through and make their decisions. And then the budget will come over to the Senate. So you'll receive the budget around April 10th. And then it's required that all the you're done to act on all your House bills by June 5th, and then form committee conferences June 12th, and et cetera, until the end of the session. So the Senate will have not the full month of April, but most of the month of April and May to complete your work. A couple things to point out is the House is going to be working with Chris over the next couple of weeks to come up with revenue estimates that will then be presented in a resolution for the full House to take a vote. We don't know when that date will be. It really varies depending on leadership, depending on the information that's needed. Typically, right around the beginning of March, the House has an idea where their revenues will be, and they'll develop their budget based on those numbers. As you know, the Senate has later numbers, more up-to-date numbers for March and April, which are the two biggest, other than June, the two biggest revenue months for the state. So you have better information as far as revenues, good or bad information where those will go, and you can make your decisions through that. And just, I won't, just wanted to kind of, for the newer members, on page 46 of the document, and it has been, the page numbers are put on so that if you're online, it's easy to see, but it's on the top corner. But just an example of a surplus statement. This is a requirement, the state has a requirement to pass a balanced budget. So you will see our office preparing, first the governor will prepare a surplus statement for general education, fishing, game, and highway, and then that our office will update those throughout the whole process for the House, for the Senate, Committee of Conference, and final, just to ensure that the state is adopting a balanced budget, which is a requirement by statute. Just fiscal committee, later in the document, page 54, outside of the budget, fiscal committee is also a committee that can approve additional funds other than general, basically federal funds or grant funds. It does have limited authority to approve additional general funds for items such as the Judicial Council, Department of Corrections, Department of Justice for litigation expenses. So fiscal, typically in a normal year, fiscal is usually approving between 150 and $200 million of federal funds and other funds that come in. Over the last couple of years, because of the additional ARPA funds, fiscal has accepted between $500 and $600 million of funds, but that has gone by. The deadline to allocate all those ARPA funds has passed. Those December 30th of 2024, and so hopefully we come down to more in the ballpark of the 150 to 200 million coming into fiscal for additional federal funds. You'll know as you're working on the budget, agencies will come in and maybe ask to include something in the budget. You may want them to come into fiscal to accept that, just because it's not a guaranteed, it's a competitive grant program, or it's something that's not going to continue through the 2 years. But we'll work with you at the Senate as you go through that. I don't want to, I have about 2 minutes, so I just wanted to kind of an update on 25. I gave a quick presentation yesterday to Ways and Means on the current status of 25. There's no final CAFR or ACFR yet, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. There has been an extension through the end of this month. There will be another extension requested by Fiscal Committee through the end of March, which is one of the latest since 2006. The reason for that is because the Liquor Commission, our office has to audit the Liquor Commission annual financial reports. They're not finalized. Liquor had a big transition from one point of service system to another in April of 2024. So there's significant testing that our office still has to do. We started off probably about 7 weeks behind receiving the information from what we're used to. We've also just received some information from Liquor that we typically receive in September. So that's a significant delay. So you're going to see that request to extend. For the budget writers, I wouldn't be too concerned. Education Trust Fund, not a lot of moving parts in the Education Trust Fund. You should have a good snapshot of where that will end. And then you'll have, as far as the general fund, there might be some moving figures into Liquor, but at least you'll have a ballpark on the current fiscal year. As you know, at the end of the biennium, any surplus will go to the rainy day fund, which currently has a balance of 292.5. Any deficit, if two conditions are met, spending is over the appropriations and revenues are below plan, they can be a transfer from the rainy day fund with approval of fiscal. However, usually what we see is the legislature suspend those provisions and make a decision how they want to handle any deficit or surplus for the current fiscal year. So that'll be something the Governor, House, and Senate will be discussing over the next few months. But as you know, and as you'll probably hear with the economists coming through the last couple of days, the picture is not as rosy as it has been the last few years as far as revenues, according to plan. Business taxes are going to be, it's always one of the big questions, the hardest one to predict, but that's your largest source of revenue. So we've been lucky with additional other fund revenue from interest on all the ARPA funds that we've had, and rainy day fund balance of $300 million. Education Trust Fund balance of $200+ million, and the general fund balance. That significant interest income has been able to buffer some of those underperformance by the business taxes, but that's something over the next couple of months, DRA, Ways and Means, both House and Senate will be working to get an idea. But we do know that the governor right now is developing a budget. We know that Governor Sununu initially in the agency budget request total of about 4% decrease to agencies to meet the current projected 26 and 27. We've heard that maybe there are further reductions that have to be made depending on the current governor's estimates for 26 and 27, but that will all be coming out. What we can do for you is update you on the status of 25 with information we know, the monthly revenue focus for general and education trust fund revenues. We can update you on any appropriations that have, statutory appropriations that have passed, and anything we know about the lapse amounts by the agencies. So I think that is the 21 minutes, and if you have any questions.
A couple of general statements, okay? The FN report is our way of getting independent information from the departments about what the bill is going to cost. There was someone last year who was trying to influence the departments about what they put into those fiscal notes. I've shut that down, and I haven't heard that there is any problems. But if any of you find that someone's out there trying to influence the departments about what they put for a statement for the money in the FN report, that is our only way to get the independent department estimate of what these things are going to cost. And that is very important that they not be interfered with by anyone else, okay? It has to be there because they're the ones that are going to have to live to that estimate, you know, as if we pass whatever it is, okay? So I want to make that statement. For general things, and, you know, if there's anybody that has any questions, we'll take those in a minute. But for general things, the meetings are going to start at either 1:15 or 1:30, depending upon what's going on. Generally, we have a leadership meeting at noontime on Tuesdays. I want to leave, you know, between 15 and 30 minutes, you know, for the possibility of caucus before we come into the meeting. So that's why it'll be 1:15, 1:30 that we will normally start the meetings at. Usually we have a couple of bills that we see at the beginning, and then until things actually start going along up in the legislature, you know, till we get their bills, we have kind of a lull, and then it'll be like a fire hose. You know, we'll just keep on getting them. I also want you to understand the process of the FN report. When the bills come before the Senate, I take all those bills and I make a decision whether they should come to finance or not, okay? And then send that on. People can comment both, you know, on the Senate floor or ahead of time as to what I make the decision. When I first got in this job, I was told 10,000 is a real good number. 10,000 doesn't even cut it. Generally, the decision is made up in the $100,000 range of a bill that, you know, we take or don't take to finance. So again, that'll vary as we go along, depending on the subject and the sense of the bills. Remember that, you know, things like we're going to hear 2 bills today. If those bills pass, because there's appropriations in them, more than likely they will get tabled on the Senate floor because there's no way for us to get that stuff into the budget that the House is doing. The only way we can do it is retain that and then actually add them to the budget that we do. Okay, so don't think because a bill passes here, you know, that it's a guarantee that it's going to go into our budget, because there will be a lot of negotiations about how much money we have, what we can spend, what we can't spend, and the final decisions will be what is actually put into that budget on some of these issues. Questions from anyone before we start the first hearing? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Forget about committee of conferences, 'cause things will be put in and taken out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, the first hearing is on Senate Bill 35. That's you. Senator.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. Dan Innes, representing District 7 from Bradford, New Hampshire. I think we did this a year ago, but we'll do it again. And let me preface my remarks by sort of giving a quick rundown of what happened and why I'm back with this particular request. Last year, this project was included in the items to be funded by leftover ARPA funds, COVID relief funds, effectively. However, as we got into summertime and after our session had ended, we learned that for some reason, the feds don't like to see us using federal funds to match federal funds. So we learned that the ARPA funds could not be used for this particular project. It is my hope that the committee will pass this bill out and we can get it to the Senate floor, probably end up being tabled there until we can try to get it funded through the budget process. By way of a quick overview, Senate Bill 35FN appropriates funds to the DOT to be granted to the town of Warner as matching funds for a section of the Concord Lake Sunapee Rail Trail, which is almost exclusively in my district, and Senator Reardon's. This is a trail under development at this point in time, and we have an opportunity to take a big step forward with it. This bill specifically requests $600,000 in general funds, which will serve as a match to congestion mitigation and air quality grant funds of a similar amount to build a section of trail between Warner and Contoocook. There's a lot of potential with rail trails that we don't always recognize in New Hampshire. Loveland, Ohio is a perfect example of what can happen with development when a rail trail comes to town. It's near where my brother lives. I visited the trail a couple years ago. Loveland was a small, sleepy town when I was younger, not much going on economically. The rail trail was built. When the trail came, businesses came. Small businesses opened, independent operators, type of businesses that really thrive in a place like New Hampshire. Ice cream shops, restaurants, small breweries, bike rentals, retail opportunities. It brought life back to the center of this town that had been left behind by time. This rail trail is a long-term project. It's been underway for a while. There are a lot of very dedicated volunteers who are working hard to get this done. This rail line was taken out in the mid-1960s, but this is an opportunity to sort of maintain that corridor, move it forward a little bit further, and help us to realize the potential of this trail over time. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, and I know there are at least a couple folks who will probably testify as well.
Questions from the committee members? Senator.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this back. So I remember the trail
Yes.
of this from last year. You had a bill, the language is the same.
Correct.
We tabled it.
Right.
We went to fiscal
Yes.
and the
ARPA.
DOT asked for that amount of money.
Yeah.
Fiscal approved it on April 19th and the Governor and Executive Council approved it on May 1st. And then
And then
something happened.
that's correct. We got into the summer and we're trying to use the funds, and the budget folks may know more than me on this. Okay, yeah. And we were simply informed that we couldn't use it as matching funds, ARPA funds. So that was the hangup.
Follow.
Absolutely.
So do you happen to know if that 600,000 was swept into the
That I don't
Affordable
know.
Housing Fund?
I don't know where that went.
Okay,
We'll ask LBA to give us that information.
okay.
Okay,
Thank
Note
you.
afterward.
thank you. I appreciate the questions.
Further questions from senators? Seeing none, thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Thank you.
David M., looks like it could be Carol.
That would be me.
All right, sir.
Thank you.
You have to come up and sit at the table and turn the red light on so all of your adoring fans across the state can hear you.
I hope so. I'll get all the adoring fans I can.
If you hit the button, you want the red light to be on.
What does the red light do?
It radiates you in a certain frequency of light. No, it just means that the microphone is on.
Estaba pensando que quizás mejor que hablo en español, pero no. I will stick with English.
Okay.
The plainest English I can speak. As some of you may know or may not know, I am opposed to the rail trail basically every inch of the way. And my opposition in terms of the funding is that I hate to see funding from any source, federal, local government, that really leads to the implementation of a project that will have extremely severe degrading consequences for a rather remarkable ecosystem along the Warner River in the Warner stretch. I've lived in Warner 56 years, New Hampshire 57 years. I have seen a steady decline of habitats, biodiversity, all the things we read about all the time in the paper. And we say, well, what can we do? What can we do? Leave some places habitable for wildlife, for biodiversity. The river system is riverine, riparian, and upland. And those three ingredients together, already squeezed between 89 and 103, are a remarkably healthy environment right now with biological diversity. There is a tremendous body of science that nobody involved in rail trail building wants to really consider that shows that a rail trail run through such a system has very dire consequences for biodiversity and so forth. And in fact, many trail organizations themselves say one of their first principles is do not run trail systems of any kind along waterways. You go toward one, you go away from, you leave that intact, the wetland system. And I'm afraid that this particular project is very, very invasive. As anybody who knows me knows, I've studied wetlands and riverine systems, and basically with a big concentration on turtle populations and turtle species. And we do have an endangered species living along that river corridor that would be really put at risk of decline and possible extirpation. Half the turtle species in the world right now are in danger of not just extirpation, which is a local extinction, but extinction with a capital E. And I would have to counter some of the things behind this program. I've heard Mr. Blagden make the point that he wants to make a rail trail that will be inspiration to future environmentalists. I can speak for quite a few environmentalists. I can speak for 4 or 5 top wood turtle researchers in the country, anywhere, and say that this is not possible. These people will look at this and say, what were you doing? What were you thinking? This is not going to be a rug that's going to be rolled up very easily. And I'm sort of breaking ranks here. Any of us involved with trying to protect species, and we do not mention a location. And I am just confident that this group will not further that information anywhere. Even in scientific papers now, we will never disclose a location in which these turtles are found. This, one of the big problems for them, other than habitat loss, is poaching and incidental collection. That is, you know, people passing by and, you know, they're beautiful little turtles. You might pick one up, go home. There's a lot of science that shows that within 10 years of public access on that level, you just don't see them anymore. They cannot live with, the turtles have to live at least 20, 25 years before they start to reproduce, and then they live a long time, 60, 70, 80 years. Over that time, they can, you know, replace themselves. A lot of nests get dug up and so on. The young do not always survive. And there are other, I'm not just a one species candidate here, and I'll wrap this up pretty quickly. That riverine corridor is exceptionally valuable to migratory bird populations. First, for migration needs. The other is, this is where they do their breeding and their raising of the young. This is totally incompatible with the human presence activity that a rail trail of this sort will bring in. And there must be another way to accommodate bike riders without having to sacrifice this. There is the cost of building it, but there's the earth cost that will bring to bear on what we have right now, which is something that we should be very guardful of and very fortunate. And it really is not our river. I mean, the rivers belong first and foremost to the species, to the planet, and so forth. So I am hoping that the Finance Committee will reconsider and, you know, find, there are a lot of fine uses, I'm sure, for $600,000. And if any of you would like to have any further information from me, I would invite you to visit Carroll Studio Gallery website. There are 2 articles there that some of you may have seen. I wrote a piece.
We do need to wrap this up a little bit.
Okay. Anyway, any of you who want to see 2 articles that I've written, they're on that website. They were published in the Concord Monitor. One is called Of a River and a Rail Trail. The other is called The Fate of a River, which really expounds upon what I'm expounding upon.
Thank you. Do the committee members have any questions for Mr. Carroll? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Barbara?
And the light's already on, so.
Lights on.
Thank you. I'm also a resident of Warner, and I thank the chair and the committee for giving me this opportunity to speak today in opposition to this appropriation. My first, I'm going to make three points. First is the environmental consideration, and just to echo for a moment what Mr. Carroll said. In Warner, the stated objective of the Concord Lake Sunapee Rail Trail is to build the trail along the abandoned rail bed paralleling 12.9 miles of the Warner River. This would be a very long trail, quite literally cutting the town in half. Building a long trail along the entire length of the river will cause multi-tier environmental damage. Initially, the damage is in habitat loss through construction, but more devastating is the persistent presence of humans in a fragile ecosystem that has been protected by its remoteness. The Warner River is a state-designated river because of its outstanding natural qualities and ability to support threatened and at-risk species. It's a greenway for wildlife. It's a flyway for migrating birds. It's an oasis for the natural world from human interference. The rail bed has already been reclaimed by nature in the 60 years since the last train traveled through Warner. But like all of nature, the river community is more at risk every year from shrinking habitat and the stresses of climate change. Best management practices for trail building dictates that sensitive environmental areas should be avoided. But this project intends to push development right through the heart of the riparian zone, ignoring the existence value and the beneficiary value of the river ecosystem. My second point is to the congestion mitigation and air quality grant. As defined, projects that, this grant are defined as projects that reduce mobile source emission in both current and former areas designated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to be in non-attainment or maintenance of the national ambient air quality standards for ozone, carbon monoxide, and or particulate matter. This project achieves none of those objectives. Warner has no traffic congestion or issues with air quality to mitigate. This project is more likely to increase traffic when out-of-town bikers drive to Warner to park their cars along the trail to begin or end their recreational outing. And my third is the economic impact to the town of Warner. Warner is a town of just 3,000 people suffering all the same economic strains as other small towns in New Hampshire. Over and over again, the Friends of the Concord Lake Sunapee Rail Trail have sold this project by stating that not a penny to build or maintain this trail is or ever will come from the taxpayers of Warner. This can't be true. First, all government grants come out of the pockets of taxpayers. Additionally, it's already costing the town in administrative time and legal fees to review the grants and subcontracts, write checks, and hold meetings concerning the rail trail project. But what will it cost the town to police a 12-mile-long trail? What will it cost to have Warner's overstretched volunteer rescue squad locate and transport injured bikers calling from remote parts of the trail? How much road crew time will be spent maintaining the proposed new bridges and walkways or picking up trash and cleaning storm debris? How will the trail be repaired when floods wash it out, and who pays to mitigate the damage from the materials that wash into the riverbed or from the introduction of invasive species? This project is bound to become a financial burden to the taxpayers of Warner. And most of all, why isn't the immeasurable cost in the environment and the rights of the citizens of Warner to make the decision to accept or reject this project being respected? In this year of decreased revenue and tight budgets, this committee will need to be judicious about where state funds are spent. And I'm asking that you please do not support this very flawed project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do the senators have any questions? Barbara Mary, right?
Marty, M-A-R-T-Y. Yep,
Okay, I couldn't quite see the T in there.
that's okay. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. And the last person who signed up is Tim.
Chairman Gray, members of the committee, thanks very much for, again, entertaining this request for funding. I've emailed you all revised testimony.
Did
Oh,
you state
sorry.
your name?
Tim Blagden, resident of the town of Warner, but also board chair for the Concord Lake Sunapee Rail Trail. So I won't read the testimony that I've emailed you all, right?
Correct.
There we go.
Frowned upon.
You've been here before.
Exactly. And I know each of you have rail trails in your own districts, so you know how popular they are. Whether it's the Farmington Recreational Trail or the Northern Rail Trail or the Rockingham Recreational Trail, Wyndham Dairy Trail, Allenstown Trail that opened in November, the Wow Trail, the Nashua River Trail, the Dover Trail. These are very popular pieces of infrastructure. They do spur the economy. People do use them to get to jobs, so they are used for active transportation as well as recreation. I'll take any questions that you might have and appreciate your support.
Questions from the committee members? Senator Dennis.
A couple. We heard some environmental concerns just now around this project. Isn't it true that the railroad grade still exists? That is, the built-up land across cuts and their fills and so on, right? I mean,
So
the rail bed itself has not disappeared, even though the rails are gone.
Two answers. In much of the corridor, there is still graded earth there.
Yeah.
Where this CMAQ project is, there is very little of the railroad grade there because Interstate 89 split the town in three pieces. So we would be building new trail bed for much of this 1 mile project. This project is almost entirely in the interstate median. So it's between the north and southbound barrels. It is pretty. The Warner River is there. There's a cemetery there. But we think we can be responsible with introducing pedestrian and bicycles in this space between the north and southbound lanes.
Maybe a quick follow-up.
Yes, sir.
Portions of the trail are being used presently, right? I mean, in that vicinity now.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, there's over a mile of trail at Bagley Field, which is the town soccer fields.
Yep.
There's a couple of miles of trail extending down toward Hopkinton. There's a section of trail under development now that was congressionally directed funding that's in development at Exit 9. So we're really working hard to reunite our town, not to divide it. At a human scale, this will enable people who live down by Exit 7 in the Davisville area to get to the village, to get up to Market Basket. It will enable people who live west of Exit 9 toward Bradford to get to Market Basket in the village. Good for the area.
Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
On the sheet, we have got everybody that signed up, has spoken. On the internet, do we know how many people signed up for? It's in my book. All right. Have to be retrained every year, you know? Okay, 3 support and 17 opposed. Okay, and with that, we'll close the public hearing, and we'll open the next public hearing in just a minute.
I'll let you know when I'm ready.
Okay. All right, Senator, if you'd introduce your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Cindy Rosenwald from Senate District 13, and I'm pleased to be back in the room with all of you. I'm also pleased to introduce Senate Bill 20, which will have the state pay 7.5% of the employer cost for the public employee pension. It's a small part of what the state did for 40 years until 2011. Having the state help pay for a part of the retirement system cost is the only true mechanism the state has for helping to reduce local property taxes, because the municipalities and the counties get a smaller bill. So they actually have less tax they have to raise on it. Everything else we do, such as returning more of the rooms and meals tax revenue or helping pay for water and sewer projects, sends money to the subdivisions, but doesn't necessarily mean tax relief. However, a lower bill for the employer's cost of the pension does mean lower burden on property taxes. We recognized this in 2021 and made a one-time 7.5% payment. This bill would extend that good idea to help property taxpayers who we know are hurting. In my city of Nashua, for example, the state's decision to renege on its promise cost property taxpayers about $10 million a year. Between 2012, when we first didn't get any contribution from the state, and now, Nashua taxpayers have had to pay approximately $100 million of additional property taxes because the state didn't keep its promise. I've heard arguments in the past that having the state pick up part of the pension cost just encourages cities and towns to overpay their employees. I can tell you that isn't true. We have a spending cap in Nashua on our budget, and we don't even pay our teachers enough to keep many of them for more than a year or two. They graduate, take a job in Nashua, and then quickly move on to a better paying town. We also have a 10% vacancy on our police force. We are not overspending. As I talk to voters, the number one issue I hear about is property taxes. Not even housing in general, but property taxes. Older residents in particular are worried about being forced to move out of the homes they've lived in for years. We were all elected to help solve the problems Granite State families are facing. The number one issue that we see everywhere is the cost of living, and property taxes make housing even more expensive. Senate Bill 20 is an opportunity to take a concrete step towards lowering the cost of living for our residents. It's the only sure means we have to help with property tax relief. Our residents are counting on us, so let's do it. Thank you. I'd be happy to take questions.
Questions from the senators? Senator Lang.
Thank you. So the property tax relief piece of this, I'm trying to struggle on how the state guarantees property tax relief by paying this. Isn't the municipality have the right to just use the state funds to pay for the retirement and then move the money they had allocated for the retirement to some other spending program and thereby not reducing taxes?
Well, the cities and towns and counties actually get a lower bill for teachers and municipal employees. So whether they would move funds around, that would be up to the municipalities, but the state, it's the state's only surefire mechanism, because the retirement system would send a lower tax bill to the subdivisions.
Okay, I think I got my
Additional
answer.
questions from the senators? Senator Bertzel.
Thank you. So at 7.5%, my question would be, there's nothing in here that allows the state to participate in any increases in the contract negotiations. So every time they increase their pay, then our costs would go up. So how can the state help control the increase that the 7.5% would create every year?
Thank you for the question. I mean, that is the argument I've heard, that it allows a city or town to just pay its employees more. But in a place like Nashua, we have a spending cap, so we just can't do that. And the mayor of Nashua is here, so he'll be able to talk to you more about that. We just don't overpay our employees. That's why we can't keep teachers. That's why we have a 10% vacancy on the police force.
Thank you.
Seeing no addition, Senator Waters.
So Senator, for those of us who were in the legislature back when the changes were made to the pensions, we did a lot of hard work to address the unfunded liabilities, and that is on a good track. But here's the one remaining thing that we could do to undo that terrible shift down to the local property taxes, taxpayer related to the pension fund. Is that the case?
Yes, I think that's the case, and that's why we recognized in 2021 that it was worth doing. And we did appropriate money to pay 7.5%. In the beginning, the state was paying 40% until about 2010, 9, and we lowered it to, I think, 35%. Then it was eliminated entirely in one stroke in the budget of 2011. Since that time, all of the subdivisions have had to pick up the entire cost of the pension when the state's promise to pay, back in the day, 40% of it was a way to entice the subdivisions to put their employees in the system, to broaden the pool and spread the risk around. So they've basically done that, but now we have sent the bill entirely to the property taxpayers.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you
Senator.
very much.
And Dennis, you're next on the list.
Good afternoon. I have distributed these by email, so my comments, brief comments today will simply summarize that and maybe spark a discussion if there are any questions afterwards. So Chairman Gray, Vice Chairman Innes, members of the committee, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you and appear before you today. My comments I'm expressing my understanding that the state is facing a difficult budget cycle, and I think we just heard certainly a taste of that prior to these hearings starting. And I'm here to advocate for a positive vote for Senate Bill 20. And what I'd really like to do is to provide a perspective that the cities and towns, and obviously in this example Dover, we are feeling similar pressures. And I have some information that might help you understand and demonstrate that we have been cautious with spending, in particular with a focus on hiring and compensating our municipal employees. Obviously, our greatest expense for Dover is our city and school employees. Most of my comments relate specifically to city operations. So as the resources become more constrained, I certainly don't take the difficulty of your decisions lightly, and I know there's a lot of hard work to be done over the next several months. So we do make our spending decisions independently, and as the discussion goes about how is it we can feel that any savings coming out of the retirement system will be applied towards property tax relief, and I believe there are some mechanisms for that. For example, to use that amount at the end of the cycle when the DRA is calculating our tax rate, so that money is taken right off the tax bill. So we have been a good steward of the taxpayer dollar, and I've got some information over the last few fiscal years about where we've gone and what we've been able to maintain. So for fiscal year 25, our staffing increase was less than 1%. Basically, that was encumbered by the need to hire 2 additional employees to run our PFAS drinking water plant. And the first several years of that are being paid for by the responsible party, no cost to the taxpayer. Our retirement cost for that fiscal year increased $200,000. In fiscal year 24, our staffing increased by about 1.7%. Most of that was the conversion of a handful of part-time employees to full-time employees distributed across several departments. And our retirement costs for that fiscal year were on the low side at $30,000. Fiscal year 23 was one of the higher ones in recent years, where it increased 3.8%. However, that was based really on one hiring decision that we made, which was to bring on 8 additional firefighter EMTs so that we could staff a 3rd ambulance across all our shifts. And the driver behind that was that the number of service calls that our fire department, fire and rescue, have received over the last several years has increased by 50%. And the number of simultaneous calls, where you get 2 calls at once, all the way up to having 5 calls at once to handle for a medical emergency, has increased almost 100%. The nature of the calls that our fire and rescue are getting over the last several years, as many of you I'm sure realize, has changed from 30, 40 years ago, where it would be a traumatic injury that would
We need to
cause
get
the call.
back to the content of the buildings.
And so we have made increases on that, but it was based on some solid information. Fiscal year 22, it increased by less than 1%. To retirement costs there, though, it did increase by $500,000. So in general, we have been keeping our pay raises between 2% and 4% over the last several years, well under the consumer price index. We have added small amounts of fringe benefits, mostly those that don't really have a fiscal component to it. We have been using pandemic-related grant funds over the last several years, as have all communities and the state. But we did so with the recognition that those funds will expire and have expired. We've been careful to minimize how those costs have been incorporated and passed on to the taxpayer. So the final data point is, if you're looking back over 10 years over our hiring, we've really maintained the number of FTEs per 1,000 people at the same number, between 9.9 and 10.2. So we have accounted for growth, which has been significant in the city, but have not significantly increased the folks doing the work to do that. So with this bill creating the ongoing 7.5% state share,
The intent of this will be to reduce the property tax burden on residents, and certainly the city of Dover is welcome to any discussion on how the state would want to make sure that that is realized on an ongoing basis. We just heard some discussions about Nashville's experience. Dover is similar. The surging market in residential property values is really creating a hardship for single, two-family, three-family residential property owners. For example, this year, the residential property valuation went up 11 to 12%. Commercial property values went up just 1 to 2%. That's a multi-million-dollar shift in property tax liability going from the commercial sector to the residential sector, and we have folks that are feeling the impact of that. So in conclusion, the city of Dover, and I'm sure all municipalities, would very much like to continue to work with the state to provide high-quality life safety, law enforcement, public works, and other important quality of life services to our neighbors, to our residents. Our residents have clearly expressed to us that cutting essential city services is an action of last resort. And it asked us to find means to limit property tax increases without significant cuts. And we are intending to do just that. So we know that the budget discussions at the state level will have varying impacts on upcoming municipal budgets. A strong consideration of Senate Bill 20 will be important as we work through these challenges. Dover feels that providing relief in the employer costs of the retirement system is foundational to the continued economic health of the state and of the municipality. So I thank you for allowing me this time to provide you this information. And
Questions from senators? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. It's good to have the Deputy Mayor of the Garrison City with us. And as a taxpayer in Dover, I certainly understand, like we're hearing from Rochester, everywhere else, about the impacts of the property tax increase this last year. But I wanted to get your perspective in particular on Dover as a tax cap community. I think I'm the only district that has 2 cities that are both under tax caps and a county government that also respects that, so that the impact of this relief would be immediate because of the tax cap particularly?
I think so. I think that's quite true. Dover, we operate under a single tax cap, but we balance the books separately between the school and the city side. The school has obviously had some issues getting the funding, consistent funding it needs from the state. We've seen $1 million cuts over the last several years. So there's been some overrides of the tax cap to accommodate that drop in funding. On the city side, we maintain at the tax cap every year, year after year. And we often go below it. And in fact, we actually will take some of the funds from the city side and transfer them over to the school side. But there will be immediate relief. And like I said, I'm welcome to any and all ideas to make sure to hold the city accountable that any savings that does come out of this 7.5% reduction is seen directly in property tax adjustments that are the benefit to the citizens.
Follow up?
Yeah, thank you. And, in the terms of public safety with the police and fire here, I've done a lot of work on recruitment and retention. We know it's a statewide problem, but wouldn't this give you another tool to ensure that you can recruit and have the funding in the city to be able to attract and to fully staff what you need to staff for public safety?
I think it would be one of the tools, maybe not necessarily the most impactful, but certainly one of them. We have been quite fortunate. I mentioned the 8 firefighters we hired a couple of years ago. That timed out just right, so they were able to immediately fill those. We are, similar to Nashville, we're in the 5 to 10% below our manning goals for the police department. In fact, we're probably budgeted 12 positions less than we were 15 years ago. So we're still struggling to kind of come back up to the right size to get to the levels that our accreditation service says is recommended for a city the size of Dover.
Additional questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much. Margaret, you're next on the list.
May I hand out some written testimony, Mr. Chair?
Just hand it to the
Good afternoon. I'm Margaret Burns, representing the New Hampshire Municipal Association, here in support of Senate Bill 20. As many of you are aware, restoration of a state retirement contribution has been a long-standing policy of our membership, which is the 234 cities and towns of the state of New Hampshire. We're grateful for the continued effort to restore some portion of the state retirement contribution, and the testimony you've heard today from the city of Dover, as I'm sure you will hear from the town of Derry and the city of Nashua as well, is representative of what cities and towns are facing and what their municipal budgets are facing in light of the many years since the state retirement contribution has been eliminated. And also for that reason, I will be brief in my testimony. We understand that this will be a challenging budget process. However, in recent years, the legislature has seen to recommit state aid revenue promised to municipalities. The one-time 7.5% contribution that was made a few years ago, which has already been noted here in this hearing, as well as the legislature's significant effort to increase the Meals and Rooms distribution to 30%. Although that was not the original 40% that the original legislation contemplated, that effort to make that increase and return more revenue to municipalities renewed the partnership between state and municipalities and was really a recognition that state and municipal budgets are tied together, and there is a partnership between the state and political subdivisions in addressing the issues that face the state of New Hampshire. So for those reasons, I would ask for the committee's support in passing this legislation and renewing a promise that was made to municipalities and their taxpayers, as all additional revenue to municipalities and all decreases in expenses to municipalities are in effect property tax relief by offsetting the amounts that municipalities must raise through property taxes. Thank you very much.
Questions from the senators? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you. And I appreciate the Municipal Association's longstanding support for this. And would it be fair to say that in the corner office, Governor Ayotte has really been a strong supporter of trying to do something for Group 2?
Absolutely. That's what I understand.
Thank you.
Additional questions from the senators?
Thank
Seeing
you.
none, thank you very much, Margaret. Dave? As we get down to Derry and Nashua, I don't know how much is left to talk about, so. No. Nashua is the center of the universe, huh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, I'm Dave Karen, the Town Administrator in Derry. I had emailed my testimony to you yesterday, so I won't repeat it, just highlight a couple issues. Is that, again, based upon state tax policy, essentially, virtually all of the property taxes funds most municipal services, both on the town and the school side. So it's very important for us to maintain a stable tax rate and reduce it where we can. The impact upon Derry for this year by the state not honoring what was a 30-year commitment at 35% is $2.8 million. And we have cumulatively, since 2010, absorbed $14.4 million in additional property tax burden to our residents resulting from the state at that time deciding to no longer honor its commitment. Again, you have the rest of my testimony, but to the question of whether any kind of relief goes to the bottom line, there's really two examples. One, a couple of years ago, when the legislature did a one-time 7.5% payment, we actually put that in a fund and drew that down over 3 years because like Dover and like Nashua, we are a tax cap community. We're the only town in the state which has a tax cap. It's been supported by the voters for the last 30 years. And you enter financial trouble when you use unsustainable revenues for recurring expenses. So we had to use those funds and bleed them into the budget over a 3-year plan. Now, the other example is, and I appreciate the legislature's actions back in 2011 to finally settle out with the meals and room distribution ought to be and keep it as sustainable revenue. Being a tax cap community is really ironic because when the inflation rate is high, your tax cap is high, and that's when you can do capital projects, which are the most expensive. But that's just the way the process works. So several years ago, when our tax cap was not at the typical 1.7 to 2.4%, but was at 5.9%, the town council, who I work for, made the very difficult decision to start working, replacing Central Fire Station. So we went through a process of bonding that, and our anticipated tax increase on the town side was 5.5%. The state came through with additional meals and rooms. That all went to the bottom line. So the town was able to begin the process to replace its fire station and keep its tax rate increase to under 3%. So it's very important that we restore that partnership between the state and the communities so that the state can help us with a fair share of paying for our police, fire, and teacher retirements. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much. And now the center of the universe, is that what I was supposed to say, Senator?
And my neighbor.
And your neighbor, okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Jim Donchis, the mayor in Nashua, center of the universe, as you've already heard. I could repeat much of what's been said already, but I'll try to add some additional information. I will just say to begin that the cities and towns were induced to enter the state pension system with the promise that there would be a 40% contribution, which the state honored for a long, long time. But beyond that, I wanted to answer a couple of the questions that have been asked. First, Senator Birdsall asked about, well, the state of New Hampshire, has no control over the negotiations and the cost of raises. Now, of course, there is considerable tax pressure, as you've already heard. So I can tell you cities and towns are not just giving away a lot of money. But beyond that, if you talk with the people from the pension system, they will tell you, and this figure comes from a year or so ago, that 75% of the contributions made by cities and towns doesn't even relate to the current employees. 75% of the money we're paying in is recapitalizing, building up the assets of the system. So really, whatever we pay city employees is a very small factor in a quarter. Any raise we might give is a very small factor, given that only 25% of our contributions relate to the current employees. So the pension obligations of the cities and towns has skyrocketed over the last few years, 10 or 12 years. And there are two causes. Number one, the state reneged on its promise to pay a portion of the municipal pension costs. But even bigger than that, the system, mistakes were made, the system got undercapitalized, some say mismanaged, and as a result, it went down to the percent funded went down into the middle 50s, and now I think it's up into the 60s, but increasing that percentage funded from wherever it was in the 50s up to 100%, which is now a mandate of the legislature, is incredibly expensive. So, and again, 75% of the money we're paying in is going to solve that problem, a problem that the municipalities had nothing to do with. To give you some perspective on the burden which this has placed, this whole problem, both the lack of meeting the state's promise and the paying for the prior mistakes. And I'll give you Nashua's figures, but it's equivalent for other cities and towns. We're paying in like $35 million to the state pension system, which is about 15% of the tax burden goes to the state pension system. Again, the vast majority of that is recapitalizing the system, not paying for current employees. So this has created a huge problem for local property taxpayers. We're a very high property tax state, and a very significant portion of what they're paying in relates to the state pension system. When I say 15% of the the total bill. So let's say the average person pays $7,000 to $8,000. We're talking about $1,000 to $1,200 a year from the average homeowner is, and it may be higher in other towns. $1,000 to $1,200 for the average homeowner is going to the state pension system. And we believe, you've heard from other cities and towns, that it would be helpful if the state again returned at least to the 7.5% to help us try to keep property taxes to as low a level as we possibly can. And I will be glad to answer questions.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is the last person that signed up on the list. Is there anyone who did not sign up and wishes to speak now? Seeing none. There were 2 people who did not check the box to speak. They are both in favor, and the online signups were 44 support and 5 opposed. Okay. LBA, I would be interested in the calculation that the mayor alluded to at how much of what contributions were that go to pay the unfunded liability. That would be a good thing to have when we get into executive session. Okay. I don't know if anyone is ready to exec any of the bills that we heard today. Probably best thing to do is to at least wait until next week. I know there will be a couple of people missing next week, but so we'll still have 5. Okay. Something about a president and anyway. Do any of the senators have anything else to come before the committee before I adjourn it? Seeing none, we are adjourned.